Starting. Good evening, and welcome to the fourth episode of the 2018-19 MURSD series. Tonight, we're hosting two nationally recognized educators who wrote an engaging, thoughtful, honest book about reimagining education because they have walked the walk. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Pam Moran and Ira Socol to the MURSD Leads author series. Thank you both for joining us.
Great to be here tonight.
Great to be here. Yeah.
For those of you who may not know these two authors, Pam is the newly retired former superintendent of the Albemarle County Public Schools in Virginia. She spent 43 years in public education, including 12 as superintendent. And in 2016, she was named Virginia Superintendent of the Year, and she was also a national finalist. She's known throughout the country for her collaborative work with educators to empower them and support them in creating relevant, meaningful learning experiences for each and every student. Ira Socol is a longtime educator and technology administrator. He's the founder of the Speed Change blog, which I can't recommend enough. As I was getting started in my education career, it was one of the first must-reads I had. In 2017, he was named one of the top 30 technologists, transformers, and trailblazers by the Center for Digital Education. He brings a wealth of experience to the field of education, having worked in New York City as a police officer and EMS expert. They're also the subject of my big teased announcement for those of you who were following on Twitter. I'm thrilled to report that Pam and Ira will be the keynote speakers for our second annual 2019 Inspired Learning Convention, which is coming up on March 8th at Nipmuc Regional High School. So Pam, Ira, so glad you'll be able to join us and share your message to all of New England.
We're looking forward to it.
It's very exciting to get a chance to speak to you all. That'll be great.
Now on to our panel. She is the Assistant Superintendent of the Mendon-Upton Regional School District. Welcome, Dr. Maureen Cohen.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
They are the co-principals of Nipmuc Regional High School. Welcome, John Clements and Marianne Moran.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
She is a fifth grade teacher at Misco Hill Middle School. Welcome, Mrs. Brenda Webster.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You look so comfortable, Brenda.
I'm trying.
All right, and she is a English teacher at Nipmuc Regional High School. Welcome, Katie Dreyer.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Katie. It's great to see you.
And last but certainly not least is a person I've been begging to join on the panel, and Pam and Ira were the two people that finally got him to come aboard. The History Department Chair, High School. Welcome, Brian Hodges.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Brian.
All right, so let's get started. I'm going to take the first question. So Pam and I are in our district, we've been exploring this idea of inspired learning, or these experiences that last a lifetime. Could you talk a little bit about what your most inspiring learning moment was as either a student or an educator throughout your long careers?
Ira, you want to jump in first?
Sure. I'll break the rules a little bit by briefly talking about two things because they go together, I think, really importantly. I'm not a person who's liked school very much. And you can talk to elementary teachers, you can talk to my graduate school professors, and they'll probably all testify to the same kind of behaviors that haven't really worked in the classroom for me all along. But I was lucky enough to attend a high school, and we talked about this in the book a bunch, that was designed in part by Neil Postman, who wrote the legendary book Teaching as Subversive Activity. And that experience taught me that all kinds of students, and all kinds of students who didn't find success in conventional kinds of schools, could really find success and could really find success not just in school, but in life in a lot of ways. And the inspiration from those years of watching not just myself, but a lot of people like me finding success has really led to the work I've ended up doing in education. And what that has led to is a lot of things that I've had just the joy of doing with Pam, with a lot of other educators, first in Michigan and then in Virginia. And one of the days that really stands out for me was a moment a few years ago when we opened the first of our really large multi-age elementary spaces. So imagine a room built for 130 students, kindergarten through 5th grade, and 6 teachers. Now, this is not a rectangle in any way or a square, but a sort of multifaceted, complex shape with multiple levels and multiple ceiling heights and a kitchen at the middle of it, and allowing 130 children to run into it on the first day and having those students run into it as if they were entering a park and be instantaneously at home and not need adults to say anything to them, to see them jump into the work of learning. And virtually to watch as the days unfolded and not have to hear adult voices raised above children's voices anytime. And the magic of that, the magic of watching human learning unfold naturally is, you know, it was one of the most inspiring sights I've ever seen, and sort of proof of concept and proof of what we are really sure is possible. Pam?
Well, you know, I thought about this question, David, when I saw it show up in the script, and I thought, how would I ever pick any one particular inspiring moment from all of the inspiring moments that I've been able to be a part of from really the first day that I was teaching in 1975, which is a lot more years teaching than some of you are old that are on this call with us tonight. But one of the things that I really think about is that inspiring moments can come from, as Ira said, from, you know, a significant sea change in the way we think about what kids are what's possible for kids, and the way that as we make changes as adults, that it frees kids to really discover that they have such an incredible sense of voice, a real belief, you know, when kids really capture that belief in who they are as learners, and it gives them a sense of agency, and you get to see what it is that sticks with kids for life. You know, I've seen a lot of kids grow up. And then lastly, kids that have influence and realize that they can potentially change what goes on for themselves, for others in their classroom, their schools, their communities, and even the world. And, you know, and I think that, Ira, we've seen examples of kids' influence at all kinds of levels as a result of work that they've done in recent years with us. But also, I think back that one of the things for me recently that really jumped out and struck me as incredibly important as we think about what it is that kids take away with us from their work at any point in our careers. And this was a person that I ran into recently who was celebrating their 55th birthday. And I have to tell you that when you've taught somebody who's just turned 55, you know you've been teaching for quite some time. And I was a young, right out of college educator when this kid was in my class, and now he is an adult with you know, children that are grown up and have children of their own. We were talking, and I said to him, you know, so what were your takeaways from when we were together, me as a teacher and you as a student? And he reminded me that I was teaching environmental education at the time through life sciences in a middle school. And one of the things that we really fought to do was to help our kids who were, in many cases, rural children who never got out of the county in which they lived, to have experiences that took them beyond the boundaries of our county. And we did everything we could to figure out how to do that, including me learning how to drive a school bus. And so we took a group of kids every year, as when I was a teacher, on a variety of experiential opportunities outside of our school system. And one was, and the one that he was reminded of, was going to West Virginia to a wild cave, and us helping this group of 7th and 8th graders go through this cave, wading through water, with the only light that they had were flashlights that they were using. And I think about of all the experiences that this kid had as a learner going through school and beyond, that what he remembered most was this experiential setting where he was able to do something, as he said, this was not something I would have ever had a chance to do. And because of that, you know, this is a person who stayed very close to the environment and really has a real sense of environmental ethos today. And so, you know, I really appreciate when what I find is that what we do as teachers, incidentally, we may never know the impact that it has. I was able today, in my capacity with the Virginia School Consortium for Learning that I'm working with now, to have a young person, she's in her early 30s, who also was a student of mine a number of years ago when I was an elementary principal. And she's gone. She left the system. She went out. She became a teacher, taught in Washington, D.C., inner city schools for about 10 years, and came back to help take care of her grandparents who raised her in one of the hollows here in Albemarle County to teach in one of our middle schools. And one of the things that she wrote me when she came back to Albemarle County, she said, you may not remember this, Dr. Moran, but when I was in 5th grade and we were getting ready to have a promotion ceremony, you had allowed me to work with a young student who was a peer of mine who was significantly autistic. And she said, we were getting ready to go through the promotion ceremony, and I came to you and I said, would it be possible for this student and me to walk in first, because he's so sensitive to noise that if we wait till the end, his last name actually started with a Z. She said, he's not going to be able to actually go through the ceremony with us because it'll be too upsetting to him. And she said to me, I realized later on at that moment when you said yes, that would be great, and really set me up to be able to have that opportunity to influence what happened that day. That was the moment where I decided to be a teacher. Now, I've actually cried telling that story before, and probably could do it, fall into tears right here. But one of the things I think we underestimate as educators is that our most inspiring moments, sometimes we don't even know about them, because it's what kids do after they leave us and years into the future that really represents who we are as educators, that open up opportunities for kids to have voice, agency, and influence. So those are just two small stories of many that were part of my life as an educator. And I could go on and tell you 100 more probably in the next 15 minutes, but let's move on, David.
Thanks, Pam. Really appreciate it.
We'll take those 100 more examples anytime you want, Pam.
I tell you, it's what gives us all lift, isn't it?
It does. I think because those moments are the ones that are so lasting that they make an impact that can be transformative, not only on a learning moment, but a kid's life. I think that's probably why this question of inspired learning is such a great springboard as we take a deep dive into your book. And so I wanted to ask a question that I already know the answer to from reading the book, but one that I think bears repeating for the audience. And so I'm wondering if you could take a few moments and talk a little bit about how you helped to make all the change happen in Albemarle.
Wow. Well, you know, I share this a little bit in the book, but a few years ago, Ira and I were getting ready to go do a presentation down in Florida. And I knew that one of the questions that we always get asked is, how do you get significant change to go viral inside a school system? And it struck me that as I was thinking about it with him as we were planning for this, oftentimes I'm the planner, Ira waits to the last minute. He says to me, it'll all be fine. I say, no, we have to have a lesson plan. And we argue it out. And then finally I win and we get a lesson plan. Then Ira says, and then you go and ignore it, Pam. So, you know, there's a story. A little background. But I realized as we were talking through that question that you just asked, that I started out with a mentor who taught me years ago. He said to me, Pam, I was telling him about a teacher who had asked years and years and years ago that she wanted to ditch basal readers and go to using a novel-based program. And I was a little uncomfortable about it. And I was sharing it with my mentor, and he said, Pam, let me tell you something. If a teacher comes to you with an idea that they think is going to make learning better for kids, and you say no, not only will they go out of the room and never come back to you with an idea, but they'll go out and tell 10 other teachers, and those teachers aren't going to come to you with an idea either. And so he kind of taught me what eventually somebody made money off of as a book, the idea of that you have to get to yes if you really want to support up creativity among educators, principals, teachers, custodians, whoever it is that's working to try to make things better for kids. So I came up with this model and I said, Ira, I think I know what it is. It's called Yelp. And he looked at me and he said, Pam, there's an app called Yelp. I said, yeah, I know that, Ira. But let's think about this through this lens because it's kind of the same thing. If what we do is we get to yes with people, which is the why, and what we say is when people come to us with ideas is, so who else can you get around the table? Who else can you engage in a team? There's your E. Then you know you don't have a lot of money sitting around to support up, trying to really support up creativity among our educators and kids and even parents at times. So you got to figure out how do you leverage resources? How do you repurpose the funds you've got, the resources you've got, whether it's people resources or financial resources to try to support up people with great ideas. So there's the L. And then lastly, sounds really simple. How do you prototype it? How do you keep it small enough at the starting point that what you will do is to have the greatest opportunity for success? We call it aim small, miss small, so that you go through that Yelp model, say yes, engage a team, leverage your resources, and prototype it. And I have to tell you, I was so proud the other day because I saw a tweet go up from a teacher in regards to a chat. And what came out of that is she responded to a question in the chat recently and said, our former superintendent used to always say to us, how do you help your teachers get, the ideas they wanted in place? How do you get to yes with the educators that you're serving? So that's what we really went after. And I like to think that that model is at the heart of how we got change moving forward. And eventually, when great ideas catch fire, they do start to spread to other people.
And I think, just to build on that, there are a couple of things that I think are essential. You really have to listen to people and not pretend to listen to people. When people have concerns, you have to honestly listen to those concerns. So I remember when we were talking about how do we reconceive our libraries into, learning commons and really active maker spaces and, active learning places. And we had a middle school librarian who was really nervous about it. And she's, and when it came down to it, as we sat and talked, is she was really worried about students being out of her sight, in a middle school environment. And, finally I said to her, what middle schoolers need, what high schoolers need, adolescents in general, is not real privacy. They need apparent privacy. They need the sense that they can be away from adult gaze, even if it's not really out of sight. They just need the sense of that. How do we create this in this world? How do we create glass walls and sort of a semi-sense of things that kids can feel like, they're not on display all the time? You also have to be willing to gently challenge people, to say to the teacher who gives a 0, is it really fair to give a child a -65? Effectively as a grade, what's the purpose of that? And it's also really important that you learn, as Pam says, to prototype, to make those very small bets and to be willing to, with small amounts of money, to take those risks yourself. The one I always, joke about is when one of our sort of brilliant teams of people came to me and said, we want to do, beekeeping at one of the high schools. And I'm looking at this purchase order and saying, 20,000 bees for a high school. What could possibly go wrong with that? But the fact is, by making that investment, that completely changed earth science at our high schools, turned it into something active and amazing and incredible. It's just something wondrous. And it requires, our kids deserve a little courage at times. then that's a big part of that.
And we've had teachers, come to us with ideas that a lot of people think are crazy, and we have to figure out how do you get there. So the bees are one. Another was an elementary teacher. You know how every year, at least in the South, I don't know if this happens in Massachusetts, but we have a grade level that part of the curriculum is sort of life cycles, and they always hatch eggs every year, and then we got to figure out where do the chickens go. And this teacher decided a couple years ago that once the chicks hatched, she actually wanted to keep them and let the kids watch the chicks grow up and start becoming egg layers themselves. And so the next thing I know, she's asking that question, and we're trying to figure out how do we get approval through the zoning inside the area where the school was located so that we could actually put a chicken coop in the courtyard of this school. And I was really pleased to see that chicken coop is in, and the chicks are all grown up now. So these kids are getting to see the full life cycle and not just the piece of it that involves eggs turning into chicks. And so, we've had those kinds of small examples all over. But what we find, and I think, Ira, this is really important because we talk about scale, the difference between scaling up programs and scaling great ideas across the system. And what we really see is that when one teacher takes on, or a team or a department or even a school, an idea that they want to try out that's going to really engage kids in what we sometimes call contagious creativity, what ends up happening is that even if another school doesn't want to duplicate that particular idea, what they find out is that permission that frees them to really go after things that engage more kids really opens the door for many more opportunities for kids than we would have ever imagined. And, I think one that we'll want to share before the evening's over is about a monument project we did last year when our local city, Charlottesville, literally became a hashtag in August of 2017. And we had teacher educators that took that, and rather than letting that be something that caused us to really kind of turn inward, what they did was they elevated that up and turned it into something that was a very special, unique project, along with a couple of others around that particular incident. And so, getting out of the curriculum is sometimes a really good thing for us to permission up.
It's great. Thank you very much.
I love that idea of contagious creativity. I feel like we live in the space of trying to model what if, for our educators, in terms of just think outside the box, right? What if we got chickens? What's the worst thing that could happen if we had chickens, right?
How do you go from the yeah buts to the what ifs?
Right.
It's
true, but it's fun to live in the what if space. I feel like I could live there forever. It's an exciting place to be. So the title of the book includes the terms observation and imagination, which I think are familiar terms in the world of educators and education. But you also include the term zero-based thinking, and it's one you talk about in your book. Can you explain a little bit for the audience kind of what is zero-based thinking and kind of how that has impacted your work to this point?
Well, zero-based thinking is pulled from designing, and which pulled it from business. It originally began as an idea called zero-based budgeting, the idea that you wouldn't simply roll over and say you spent $100,000 last year, so you'll spend $100,000 next year. But what it really begins with is saying, with an imagination viewpoint, and it starts with what Pam always describes as a Bell Labs moment. And there's a famous, we talk about it in the book, there's a famous corporate model where in I think 1951 or 52, the chairman of Bell Labs, which is the research arm of AT&T at the time, went to this, enormous research facility in New Jersey and called all the engineers together and said, we're going to believe that the entire telephone system in the United States has been destroyed overnight. Nothing exists. You're going to spend the next year designing a new communication system for the country. And when somebody said, but it hasn't been destroyed, he said, well, you either believe it has been destroyed or you don't work here anymore. And over the next year, these engineers developed have in our communication system. They couldn't build it all at the time because the technology didn't fully exist, but they said things like, why would we have wires anymore? Why would we certainly have this mechanical dial thing to things? Why would our phone system be limited to voice? All of these ideas, you know, just spilled out of them. They developed this entire thing. So what we talk about is, what's the dream state? If you imagine that you had never seen a school, but you had to get kids from, say, 4 to 18 or 4 to age 22, what would you do? And we're sort of betting that most of us would do very little of what we do now if we got to build it all from the start. So why do we keep doing the things we do? And you know, I came to this from a point of view when I was doing my graduate work at Michigan State. I got to a point of saying, why do we keep doing these things? And so I wrote my dissertation on the history of the education system. And when you do that, you discover very quickly that everything we do for horrible reasons. We have age-based grades because and grade level standards because the idea was to filter kids out, not for kids to succeed. The idea was to get rid of 80% of kids before 9th grade. We have rectangular classrooms because the idea was to convert all the incoming Catholic immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe into Northern Protestants, Northern European Protestants. And everything that was done was anti, sort of culturally aware teaching. Was everything we did was sort of, we rebel against, but we maintain the strictures of things. So what we ask for people to is imagine different. Now, that doesn't mean you can get there overnight. We think you have to, but we think you need to see the sort of North Star of where you want to go. So you think that as we make changes, we're moving towards something where we see a liberation of children and a liberation of humanity in learning. Pam?
Well, Ira, I think that whole concept of liberating learners and learning actually also begins with the concept of trust. And you've oftentimes said that we need to trust in childhood. And it strikes me that some of the very best experiences and opportunities that I've noticed in my work as a leader start to happen when teachers are willing to let go of control and shift the way that they think about kids as being, in some cases, I mean, it can range on a continuum of, I've seen people that almost think of kids as the enemy, to people who feel like that the job of the teacher is ultimately to be sure that every hatch is battened down and everything is set up in a situation of high control in order to be able to manage kids to do whatever it is that we want them to do. And so for me, one of the things that I come back to over and over again is that you cannot liberate the voices of educators who in turn can sustain the voices of young people if trust is not at the center of the liberation work that we believe should happen in all of our schools. And so, that for me is a key question is, what does it look like to trust in childhood? What does it look like to trust in adults as educators, and to step back and realize that part of trusting people to go after change is also about autonomy, and it's about the autonomy to not just have successful experiences, but that when failures occur, that those become learning experiences as well for kids as well as adults. I go back to my mentor again, John English, who's deceased, but was an amazing influencer in my life. And he said to me one time, you know, Pam, a kid's mistake should not be a life sentence. And it strikes me that too often in our world that we say we want trust to be the center and core of what we do with each other in our school communities. But then when somebody makes a mistake, that we tend to hold them accountable in such a way that they are likely to not try something again in which they may make a mistake. And so I think that freeing people to, in a liberating way, means also liberating people to make mistakes and to learn from those, and for us all to learn from those. I don't know if that helps to answer that a little bit.
Well, and I think just to add a quick thing, and it's a thing that I think scares people a lot, but it's that little story of that multi-age space. When we had a group of superintendents from Pennsylvania there, and there was a group of kids, and they ranged from 3rd through 5th grade, I think, and they were going out the door from, you know, this space into the playground. And as they were going out the door, one of these superintendents turned to a teacher and said, "Do you know where they're going?" And the teacher said, "No, but I'm pretty sure they do." And, you know, this seems scary at first, but of course it indicates a bunch of things to me as an observer. The teacher knows the kids and knows that it's okay for them to be going outside. To the kids, it means the teacher trusts them. And I've never seen anything learned that's not learned in a trust environment. It just doesn't happen. To the teacher, it indicates that there's this reciprocal relationship that is building constantly in the trust coming back and forth. That is, every time the kids go out and come back and nothing goes wrong, it's a win in that trust relationship with the kids. And when we over control children, we lose that every time it happens. You know, every time a teacher says you have to walk down a hall a certain way, kids lose that relationship between adults and kids are lost. And when that happens, the learning capability in the community is lost.
You know, and I know that maker spaces and maker infused learning is really important to you guys. And you know, trust is absolutely at the center of the maker community, both as adults and as kids as well. So I hope we hit where you guys wanted to be on that one.
Thank you. You're muted, Katie.
You're muted. We'll unmute you. Hang on.
Okay, I got him muted. I find it so important for educators to take risks and try new things and experiment with new learning techniques, because kids get really bored with the traditional, and it's so important to try to mix that up a little bit. I also really enjoyed your idea of applying the World's Fair Futurama to education. You challenge readers to create a space and time for students and innovative educators to come together in a lab-like approach to prototyping new learning design. And you created that space with your summer programming. Can you talk a little bit about the programs and also how the prototypes from the summer emerged in the classroom?
You know, one of the things that was, the summer spaces became real learning experiences for us. And when we started doing this, Chad, our missing author tonight, and I shared an office, which was
what? Daughter's in a program tonight.
Right. But Chad and I shared an office. We had a desk that faced each other. It was sort of a radical thing, but we got a lot of fun work done. And it began with Maker Ed, that organization, coming to us and offering us help at. We initially turned our summer schools, our elementary summer schools, then our middle school summer schools, into maker camps instead, because after all, our theory was that if kids had failed doing what they were doing all year, they would probably fail if we did the same thing during the summer. So we threw out explicit instruction and basically content-driven instruction, and went with the simple question to kids, what do you want to make? And it was magical because kids succeeded for the first time at something they were doing in school. They did amazing projects. Teachers saw them as winners. Teachers learned to teach in a new environment. And in a radical thing that we saw in the very first summer, we had more kids coming at the end of summer school than we had at the beginning of it, which seemed pretty unusual. One of the expansions we then started doing of this, because we discovered the thing, and what I loved about the environment that Pam as a leader created was 1 year, so 2 weeks before the end of school, the woman who was our Latino community outreach coordinator came into Chad and my office and said, I got hold of a double wide trailer that belongs to somebody, I'm not sure who. It's in this sort of trailer park barrio that we got 600 school kids out of. And she said, I want to do a pop-up summer program there. And she said, I want to start it right after school ends and run it for 9 weeks. Now, this may sound pretty crazy, but we said, well, okay, and
I always say, don't let a strategic plan get in the way of a good idea.
Right. So I called the principal of the closest school, which is a high school, and begged furniture and computers. We set up, we grabbed a bunch of MiFis actually and connected it to get internet to the building. We didn't really figure out who was paying the electric bill until 3 years later. It was, we dragged all these tools in, and, because if kids won't come to your summer programs, bring your summer programs to them. We ended up with parents coming. Eventually we had some professors from MIT come down and play with the kids. It was the year of the World Cup, and Pam called me up one day and said, the kids are trying to watch the World Cup on computer monitors. You gotta get them a bigger monitor. So I went and found one and dragged it down. You do what you can to engage kids, but the trick was we created a place where not just kids could learn, but staff could learn what was going on. At the same time, we built out our Coder Dojo activity, which is sort of a peer-to-peer coding camp that's K through 12. And again, we brought teachers in, we paid them to learn to teach in this multi-age, activity thing. Multi-age project-based learning. So we made summer our learn together, immersive activity. And that really, sort of, turbocharged the change process.
Well, and I think that one of the things that we learned from that, Ira, is that summer was a time where we could experiment in a more low-risk environment because the kids that were there, to a great extent, were kids that needed something extra because they had either not passed our state test, which in Virginia are known as the SOLs. And no, it does not stand for what you think it stands for.
It does. It's just honesty, truth in advertising.
Truth in advertising, standards of learning. But kids are, in Virginia are required that they have to go through some form of intervention remediation if they're not doing well in school. And so what we really realized is that, that providing them with an experiential setting where they could take context of their lives, things that they were interested in, things that they wanted to know more about, and we could turn that, whether it was through project work, maker work, interactive technologies, production kind of lab settings, but that kids could really get excited. And what was fascinating to me was that in the second or third conversion of summer school into more of a maker environment for kids, that all of a sudden teachers started seeing kids that during the school year they had not seen as particularly academically, cognitively focused kids. They started seeing those kids as really having capabilities, and it caused teachers in some cases to really move from what you might call a deficit to a strengths or an asset focused model in looking at kids and observing kids. And one of our schools actually ended up identifying some kids that were minority children living in poverty for their gifted program, because they were seeing competencies in kids and capabilities that they never saw during the school year. What we then saw was that when the school year started, the teachers that had helped build that out during the summer, they were not going to let go of that as a context builder in their own classrooms. And we started to see classrooms flipping across that entire school. And I have to tell you that 8 years later, from the first time Ira walked that school till last year, the changes that happened school-wide were totally remarkable, including that crazy wild Audubon project, Ira, that some of the teachers cooked up there.
Yeah, we had kids from the resource room, flying drones to observe birds. We involved ourselves with the Audubon Society as a bird sanctuary, so the kids could monitor and do things. But it was with kids. It was the remediation program that was doing that. So it was quite amazing.
What's more of an enrichment program.
Yeah.
So our goal is always, just like Bell Labs provided that culture of space for creativity, that then started to really influence the phone industry back in the 50s and into the 60s and 70s and 80s and even until today's world, that our hope and goal and dream was that as we flipped spaces in our system to innovation labs, that we would see that work move in and start to influence schools. And it did not take even more than a few days from teachers walking out of summer programming and back into regular school year to see total shifts in some of the classrooms around the system. And then those became sources of contagious creativity and went viral.
Can I jump in here? Because this is a good lead into what I wanted to ask about. So in regard for us, well, one, before I even get to my question, I have to say I love your book, and all I do is highlight almost excessively every amazing gem of information and quotes and it all throughout. I'm just been loving it, and it's so great to. I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking notes here nonstop. But we are working on a grant for our like an innovation lab makerspace, and we're really trying to envision whatever endless future possibilities that we don't even know exists. And with your experience, could you talk a little bit about some resources or tools that we should be thinking about that would bring about some of the creativity you've been speaking about? And also, we've been trying to think about, so it's not just an add-on or not something just out of school, and we love your model of the summer, and we've definitely been trying to think about how we can use that kind of model, but like in school, how can we integrate it so it sparks creativity and making and innovation across the school?
One of the things that, I always think, if you can do things that break through walls. I mean, schools are difficult buildings to renovate. We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with people where I said, I'd almost rather do a flip. I'd like to take all the old Sears and Kmarts and turn them into schools and repurpose schools as housing, because classrooms make good housing units. Big open spaces of old stores make better education spaces. But one of the things to think about is, are there ways you can use hallways and corridors and other open spaces to do things, so that multiple classrooms can access things more sort of more naturally and more commonly. One of the things that, you know, we found in some of our schools that were built with sort of locker room kind of spaces in the hallways. Well, we found, we made this discovery about 7 years ago, that about 4,500 high school kids and 31 of them were using lockers. So we, you know, we started ripping out lockers and using those spaces as common spaces and maker spaces and things like that. We also added them onto libraries, so they were, you know, we converted library space and we added on to library space to enable maker spaces to be part of those. So they were more able to be, you know, more commonly used as a natural part of the school day. In one high school, we literally tore down the walls between the shops and the corridors so kids could flow in and out of it, because what we found is if it required a special trip of a class to this space, they just didn't get used very often. If kids could just go to them when they needed to work on a project, that was often became the limiting factor. But the other thing is, it's the infrastructure that you can invest in which will pay off the most. So the electrical system, and we constantly talk about pull down power from the ceiling, is like the single biggest thing you can invest in. The other thing may be, if you think about what maker may look like in the future, which can involve a lot of digital things, is, you know, true gigabit networking that allows massive files, be they engineering files or virtual reality files or video files, to be moved very quickly around things. The tools and stuff, the other things that, you know, you sort of have to consider is charging stations are massive for cordless power tools. These are things that, you know, that are often sort of underbuilt in schools. The number of circuits you need to manage those things, to charge laptops, to charge, you know, all those battery powered tools that are really essential to run things these days. You know, you're no longer talking about 18 volt now. You're sometimes talking about 36 volt and 72 volt tools that run things. So the power supply things are massive things. And then you know, I think one of the biggest things that you can think of in this is furniture that can flex with kids in a lot of ways. So I always say, spend your money where it will pay off on infrastructure technology. Then go out to like Lowe's or Home Depot and buy huge chunks of butcher block and have kids build, you know, the bases out of pipe and stuff like that. That costs nothing. So don't spend money on furniture, because furniture kids can build and it will be really easy. But spend the money on the stuff that will last, you know, 20 years in the future, in terms of, you know, that infrastructure stuff that won't go away. Because here's the problem. You can buy a $50,000 3D printer. It will be worthless in 4 years. So you might as well buy a $4,000 3D printer right now that will do the work a high school kid will need in the short term. People will try to sell you all these giant, huge things. What you really need are things at the prototype level that kids can do small things with. Because anything you buy, you know, unless you're buying a really cool table saw, table saws will last forever, right? But big new technology stuff will outdate itself instantly. You know, it's kind of like buying the world's fastest computer. So I'm talking to you now on this really super laptop that was really super 3 months ago when I bought it, but is now the third one down in the, you know, in the queue. I mean, that's always the technology challenge. So to me, it's a level of spending the money on the stuff that will last and last, and going for that with the grand stuff. And then doing a lot of do-it-yourself stuff where it can, and doing the stuff that will do the prototype stuff. If kids really need bigger stuff later on, you'll find a way to finance it. But, you know, I always just warn again. I see this big stuff in schools, and I see mostly, if you buy the biggest stuff, you can't afford to fix it 3 years later, and it won't be worth it anyway. Does that help at all?
That was great. It makes me want to talk to you 2 more hours. So
well, we can do it.
And Pam's been sharing lots of info, so I appreciate that.
When we're up there with you, I hope that we'll have some time where you may be able to just set up something that might be informal the day that we're there, so that people can just come and sit down and do some chat time with us. We like to engage, and the thing that we love the most is when we're able to get to a place and actually be able to walk schools and see what teachers are doing.
And help.
You know, it's always exciting, you know, because there's great things going on everywhere. The other thing that I always found in terms of the maker work is having people think of it as being, you know, and we've got folks that do genius hours, that do a variety of different sort of opportunities for kids. You know, everybody I think in the country this week is doing an hour of code. And one of the questions that we always come back and ask is, you know, it's great to do those emphasis times, whether it's a genius hour or Google time or an hour of code, but how do you make that something that becomes part and parcel of the pathways to learning? And so one of the things that we did do was we really, we did a crazy project right in the coming out of the recession where we didn't have any money to do this. We went into departments at central office and said, who can throw some money in the pot to do this? But we put out a request for proposals to every school in the county and said, come up with an idea that you think's transformative, write it up as an RFP as part of a team, and we're going to fund them all. And, you know, every school, we wanted every school to put a project in to pitch an idea. And they did. It was called Design 2015. But what came from that, which was, I think, one of the most powerful sort of grassroots, organically grown ways of framing up the work we do, was what we call our 7 pathways to learning. And those include maker-infused learning, include interactive, using technologies in really interactive ways, increasing connectivity, not just through devices, but across people connectivity, looking at what we call P-based learning. We couldn't decide on which P we wanted to emphasize, whether it was passion, projects, or problems in terms of problem, passion, or project-based learning. So we just called it P-based learning. And then one that really emerged, and Ira was very influential in helping us really think through universal design for learning, which had always resided in, you know, our special education programs. People are always looking for how do you give special ed kids access, but we really took that to a totally different new level when we came through the Design 2015 model, as a result of teachers really thinking about, so is UDL just for special education kids, or shouldn't it be for all kids? And Ira, what emerged from that was a very different way of thinking about the way that we rolled out one-to-one technologies in UDL.
Well, and I know we're sort of heading toward the top of the hour, but we thought it was important on every device we gave every kid that, you know, every computer we gave every kid had multiple ways to do everything, including text to speech and speech to text, and, you know, and organizational tools and things like that. And we said that nobody needed an IEP to use these things, except, of course, on state tests, which we finally fought our way to some of those things with state testing things too. But that it was really important for when I was in Michigan State, and actually before that, I had developed a thing that we talk about in the book that is called tool belt theory, that it's really important for kids to learn how to learn to make personal learning devices, and how to make things work for them. I mean, I need my computer to read to me. I need it to write for me. I need it to do things. And that was a critical part of me being able to succeed in life. But, kids shouldn't work inefficiently. Kids should make their devices work for them, not the other way around. The other thing I'd say about coding, as you're working through things, one of the greatest things that came out of our summer Coder Dojo thing a couple of years ago was one of our language arts middle school teachers working in Coder Dojo, as she was working with kids doing programming in Scratch, had them working through the writing process. So the kids' Scratch games became little novels with characters and conflict, and she built all that into the story. So the kids weren't just coding, they were writing at the same time. And so it's a way of thinking about how everything you're doing is joined together in what you do. So it's not just, we're not just teaching technology, we're not just doing that, we're learning things together.
So again, amazing, Ira and Pam. We've got two more questions to our panelists. I'd like to jump into like the lightning round just to wrap up here quick. I know they're pretty heavy questions, but Brian and Brenda have two more, and then we'll wrap up and say goodnight. So Brian, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, guys. The school district that I'm in, we recently got approval to build a new school. And so we're in the exciting phase of really designing all that out. And one of the things that we're going to really work to put in the new school is a makerspace area. So we're very much in the infancy of moving to integrate this kind of learning into what we do in our school. So the talk about what would you provision the room with was super helpful. But what I'm also wondering is, what would your advice be for where to start to try to get teachers who view themselves maybe as more of like academic content teachers to view maker learning as something that's worth their time, worth their investment, especially people where that's way outside of their comfort zone, that they wouldn't imagine like playing with a bandsaw and a drill in school.
Wow, this is a biggie. And Brian, email us after this and
be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I will, because we've been talking a lot lately about what does it mean to build a school, and we hope that anybody saying they're going to build a school will think about what that means from the ground up, and it does mean thinking about how teachers have to perceive themselves, and what what a schedule looks like, and what a day looks like, and what the role is. We actually, the last thing Pam and I did together was open a new small high school that, as I keep saying, has neither classes nor classrooms.
In a warehouse.
What?
In a warehouse.
In a warehouse, right. Built in an old warehouse. And where kids bring their passion project in, and we figure out how to get them credits and content. And so one of the things is, and one of our high school principals said this to me about a year ago, and it really resonated with me. He said, in the old days, we hired elementary school teachers to be teachers, and we hired secondary teachers to be content experts. He said, but now we don't really need content experts to the same extent, because content is essentially free. He says, so now we really only have to hire teachers. And one of the things, and this is a very difficult concept for a lot of teachers to accept is that if all you do is deliver content, then a whole lot of people have you beat in this. You know, the universities around the world publish their content, their course content online. YouTube is filled with course content. Wikipedia is filled with course content. You know, there's just course content everywhere. So the problem is, and it's clear, is that if all you're offering is course content, kids will vote with their feet, or at least their brains. They will check out one way or the other. But we can't just say that to teachers, because that shatters their identity. So what we have to do is move people in a way toward, you know, a different kind of identity of themselves as guides for young people. And I think, you know, one of the ways we have to do this is talk to people about what relationships with children mean. One of the things that really struck us is we did a strategic planning process a few years ago, and we went into these big rooms with community members, and we said to people, what's your most powerful memory of an educational experience? And almost no one mentioned school. Virtually no one, not even educators. And if they did mention school, they only talked about coaches or band teachers.
Drama teachers, you know, choir teachers, librarians. No one, not a person spoke about a classroom teacher. I mean, you know, there's a message there that's really important. Teachers need to build connections with people, and there are ways to do this. So one of the things that was a real exciting process that we began a couple of years ago, and we started it with, you know, students who were already in trouble entering high school, but its success spawned a whole big movement, which was, we started with kids who were coming out of 8th grade with massive amounts of absences and suspensions and things. And we put them in a high school day where they spent half the day, every day, with 4 teachers from the 4 core content areas, teaching as a team in a combined curriculum. Suddenly, everything changed. Kids came to school, beginning with that. You know, they started coming to school. They had relationships with people. They had, you know, and suddenly people in the schools, teachers in high school, saw that the relationships really mattered. You know, that's what was the number one thing. So we introduced this sort of step by step. You don't wait until you build a school to do this. You start it first, you know, as a things. So people start to see the success of this, because that's what happens. You have to bring the content together so it has some relevance to kids, and you have to show kids that they will see the same people day after day, all the time. The other thing that happens then is that you no longer, one of the worst things we do to kids in secondary education is kids go through a day, and whether it's 4 times a day or 7 times a day, we change the rules on them every so many minutes, which any psychologist will tell you is a way of driving any human crazy. And then we complain that they go crazy. And so we have to be honest with the adults we work with, that what we're doing is causing this set of conflicts. Because when we take these conflicts away, when we let kids be comfortable in spaces, when we let them be partners with us, when we let them be trusting relationships, we're no longer in conflict all the time. And everybody gets to relax a little bit. But I'll let Pam, who's, you know, got a lot of years on me here in this world. I don't have that many years on.
Right, that's true.
I just have years all in one profession.
That's true. Right.
So anyway, but Brian, I think that one of the really key things that I've seen, and you do have to scaffold. You know, Ira is describing when we talk about zero-based thinking. You know, you start to think about what would high school be like if teachers really were teachers and not as tied to content, because they don't maybe necessarily need to be so much. But that is something that we're a ways away from in most comprehensive high schools. But what we really found, and we've got lots of examples of teachers all over the county who are content teachers in high school that have done really interesting things with maker-based learning. And one of the things that I think really helps with that is that we also really developed, our librarians became really incredibly great job-embedded professional development folks. We have an instructional coaching model, and some of our instructional coaches really wrapped around maker work as something that they could support up. Our learning tech integrators, our LTIs that support up technology, made it a mission to support up teachers to start to integrate maker work in. So we really went from not just workshopping opportunities for teachers to come in and learn how to use some of the tools of making, whether it was copper tape and LED lights and Arduinos and so forth, or bigger tools, but really taking people who already have sort of support scaffolding jobs and building into the context of their work how to support up teachers in the core content areas to find paths through making into their work. And one of my favorite projects was a teacher that, when the kids were studying how religions have spread across the world and world history, really went after maker projects. These were not PBLs, but were true. How could kids make something to illustrate that happening? And walking in and finding that one of the kids had taken copper tape and LED lights and batteries and figured out how to create a map that would sequentially light up, showing the spread of whether it was Buddhism or Christianity or whatever the religion was, that they had multiple religions that literally shifted around the world on butcher paper as a result of this teacher having set up opportunities for kids to make work that would help to illustrate concepts of religion's spread. And so, and so what that came from was that teacher having a support educator in the school who could work with her, provide space. Our libraries have provided great space for that. Our CTE mechatronics labs, I think, Ira, have been wonderful spaces. And then we've really tried to support up, how do we also move maker materials and resources from a space into classrooms. And so that was one of the other things that we've really sourced up in terms of funding, is how do we create spaces where teachers can actually grab maker materials and bring them into the classroom for kids to be able to engage in that kind of work. So, building capacity isn't going to happen for most content teachers without having people who feel confident and comfortable to support up, assisting them to do this work in a more job-embedded way. So I would just offer up, think about who in your school naturally is a maker and is willing to help other teachers learn how to incorporate making into their environment of work. And Ira, we almost saw maker work as paralleling SAMR with technology in some ways, that people started out doing some substitution and then moved that up the ladder to more imagination work.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and it's a thing of encouraging it and coaching it actively. I think, one of the things we did was to strongly get the librarians on our side first. It was an interesting thing that we heavily recruited. One of the things we did was we moved elementary librarians up to our high schools, which brought a lot of that maker strength into our high schools, and that helped. But we brought teams in and supported that up. So
I've been trying to throw some of our resources into the chat with links. I'm putting up one right now on our instructional coaching model that Edutopia made a couple, 3 years ago. But, you know, use your peer-to-peer potential to build capacity, Brian, I think is really critical. But I'm going to tell you, the biggest failures that I've had as a superintendent or as a building level administrator have come as a result of not dotting my I's and crossing my T's to build the capacity for change by supporting teachers up and getting them to invest in the work and accepting that teachers are going to move at different levels of that their pace is going to be different, just like our kids' pace is different in terms of time it takes to learn some new strategies. But one of the things that I know is that our greatest successes have come that when we make that investment in teachers and give them the time they need to do that work, then when it comes time to move it through the classroom doors and then to support it up side by side, what we have are some extraordinary examples, just like the multi-age space that Ira shared. We spent 2 years with that group of teachers, I think, Ira, building capacity before they ever walked into that space to start using it.
And I think that's a great, I mean, we could keep going for 2 hours, but because this has been amazing, but I think leaving on a note of consistency, patience, and meeting people where they are is really the key to, or the right context for that Yelp model you talked about early on, Pam. Just a wonderful interview. The book is Timeless Learning for all you watching now and on demand. I couldn't have enjoyed a book anymore. It's fantastic. We're thrilled that you're going to be joining us on March 8th for the Inspired Learning Convention. Also, for those watching, we just opened up our proposal process. So if you're interested in submitting a roundtable discussion, please visit theinspiredlearningproject.com. I just want to thank again Maureen, John, Marianne, Katie, Brenda, and Brian for joining us on the panel. Your questions were thoughtful, and I appreciate you all investing your time. We are back in the new year with Jesse Somel and Sean Michael Morris, the authors of An Urgency of Teachers. We'll be live at January 10th at 7 o'clock for the MURSD community. I'm Dave Quinn. Good night, and we will see you in January. Thank you, everybody.
David, thank you for having us. We've had a blast tonight. And thank you guys for great questions.
Thank you all.
Have a great evening.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. You too.